amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello and welcome, listeners. From being a well-known TV personality, think The D-Generation, Fast Forward, to a best-selling author of aviation, marine and other books, my guest today, Michael Veitch, is someone I have long admired. His latest book was inspired by a trivia night with a grumpy old man who Michael wished he had asked more questions of. But that night led him to delve further into Operation Oboe in the jungles of Borneo, where Australian soldiers were sent to dislodge the occupying Japanese forces. It was one of the most successful military campaigns Australia has ever been part of, but the men who fought there were never celebrated upon their return home. Michael pays tribute to those men in his latest bestseller, Borneo, The Last Campaign. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Rosemary. Lovely to talk to you.
Michael, an absolute pleasure to have you here. Now, I've long been fascinated how you moved from television to being a writer. So tell us more about this happened, or going back even further, how you got into TV in the first place.
Oh, how into TV? Oh, goodness, that's going way back. I'm even too young. When people now, and they're usually only the very old or the very drunk or both, say, "Oh, I remember you from television," and they never look old enough to. I say, you actually don't look old enough to remember me on television. But anyway,
Yeah.
so going back to when I was a student at the University of Melbourne in the 80s, and it was when the ABC actually made and fostered homegrown comedy shows. And they are looking for another show to slip into the tradition of the Gillies Report. Do you remember
All right.
Max?
Yes,
Gillies?
I do. Yes.
Max. And there's another funny show called Australia, You're Standing in It, and they wanted another one.
Right.
And they came to see our little group doing a Melbourne University review night, and came backstage and said, "Oh, we're from the ABC, and we'd like to talk to you about doing a TV show." And we were so blasé, we went, "Oh yeah, really? What? Oh, I don't know. Oh, I don't know. We're kind of busy this week." And
Right.
then someone said, "Actually, this is a chance of a lifetime, you young idiots.
Yeah.
Go and do what they say." And we did, and that's more or less how it started. And the other fellas, I was with them for a while, and they became Working Dog, and I went on to Fast Forward and things like that. And but the writing evolved out of that, because we all wrote
Right.
as we were all writer performers.
Yes.
And I come from a family of journalists.
Oh, okay.
My dad and my mum were journalists. They met over the phone during the war as Dad was reading out copy to my mother in Adelaide.
Oh, how lovely.
and the romance blossomed from there.
Yeah.
And I always thought I would be a writer. My uncle wrote for Graham Kennedy on IMT
Oh, really?
back in the days. So yeah. He knew Graham well. And then it just evolved. I'd always been interested in particularly the air war of World War II, and a friend of mine was was writing the biography of the late great Bud Tingwell, and he was asking me about his war days, and said, "Oh, you should do your own book. You know a lot about this stuff." So I said, "Oh, give it a go." So my first books were a series of interviews with a former airman who flew in World War II. They're sadly no longer with us. I did 3 books of those, talking to
That was
fellows who'd never really...
the Heroes of the Sky and Flak, is that right?
Flak, Fly, and yes, Heroes of the Sky were the 3. And then I went on to more narrative. I did a series of books on the Pacific,
Yeah.
Australian Pacific, of which this is the last. The Borneo book is the last, because Rosemary, I've run out of war. I'm at the very end of the war with this book.
Well, tell us a little bit about now this grumpy old man who inspired the latest book, which he was Bruce Ruxton, of course, wasn't he? The past president of the Victorian RSL. Tell us more about how he inspired you to write The Last Campaign, which, I mean, you described as a brilliant, but it was a controversial Australian campaign which ended World War II, wasn't it?
And remains so today, because did it really need to happen is the big question, which is a bit of a hindsight question. As they say, hindsight is always very clear, 20/20 vision. But we look at it that way because of the dropping of the atomic bombs, which
Yes.
ended the war very suddenly. The Allies had planned for the war to go on well into 1946. So nobody knew, of course it was secret, nobody knew that Japan would end the war so quickly. They were determined to fight to the death on their own grounds.
Yes.
And the Americans were the people who were going to go in and do it. So prior to that, they decided that, well, the Japanese do need to be pushed out of the areas of the Southwest Pacific that they have occupied.
Right.
And even though the main war under Douglas MacArthur had thrust north
Yes.
towards Japan and through the Philippines and all that island hopping and all those dreadful campaigns, the Australian Army was left languishing a bit, so we didn't really have much to do. For a whole year, the Australian Army did nothing but train on the Atherton tablelands
That's right.
in
Yes.
Queensland,
Yes.
and there was no job for them.
Yeah.
And MacArthur wouldn't let them go, but he didn't have anything for them until Australia insisted, look, you've got to let us do something because, we're an army and we do, otherwise we'll just put these blokes back into civilian life. And
But they're
MacArthur
trained.
said, "Oh no, don't do that. Look, there's still Borneo, and there's a lot of oil there, and there are airstrips, and
Yes.
there's still the Dutch East Indies that the Japanese have occupied. So we've got to clean out of there. You go and do that."
Right.
So
And Bruce Ruxton.
that was the
Yes. Bruce Ruxton was part of that, wasn't he?
Bruce. Just circling back to what you asked before I wandered off. Rosemary, apologies. When was it? About 1995 or something like that. Both he and I participated in an ABC Radio National live to air radio quiz,
Yeah.
which was a dismal affair because the subject was military history, and we were on a team that lost, and it was a freezing Melbourne winter's night in a drafty old RSL hall,
Yes.
and he was very grumpy.
As he
And
was
something
normally.
absolutely, he was and Bruce was a real kind of, he was a kind of I called him a kind of a right wing warrior before right wing warriors were a ten a penny. He was a real conservative. He loved the media. Bruce.
Yes.
He loved it.
Yeah.
He loved being on camera. He loved espousing. The media would just ring up Bruce to get a bit of copy. Oh, we've got a story to fill. Go and ask Bruce what he thinks about this. And Bruce would go on and on and on about, and he'd...
In your book, you say, Michael, that he was absolutely amazed that you actually knew about the campaign and that he was part of it. Yes.
This is it. At the end of this quiz, I turned to Bruce and said, Bruce, as we're all packing up, I believe you went ashore in Borneo at Balikpapan, in fact. And he swung on his heels and fixed me with these very pale blue eyes and said, "How the hell did you know that?"
Right.
And I said, "Oh, well, it's the campaign that happened at the end of the war and nobody knows much about it and seems to be ignored." And he looked at me and he said, "Come and sit over here. I'll tell you about it." And we sat for the next hour and he became a completely different person. He became a kind of a soft man and because I knew he was smart. I always knew he was a smart bloke. And he told me about, that was the only war that I saw, this very difficult slogging campaign in this island where the Japanese were deeply entrenched, and nobody told us that they were going to be so entrenched. Everyone told us it was going to be a walkover, but the war was nearly over. And we were there for weeks and weeks, pushing them into these mountains, and it was hell on earth. And a lot of us were killed, and we came back, and nobody gave a stuff about it because Australia was over the war by this stage, and
exactly.
Everybody else had packed up and gone home. The Americans they were preparing to go into the Japanese mainland, but the Germans had packed up. They'd been defeated. The British had packed up. It was just basically Australia. We were the last man left standing in World War II, Rosemary. Who knew? But,
exactly. But, I mean, there's something, Michael, the way, you described the characters like Les Cook, who, like a lot of soldiers. He'd fought in Greece and Crete, and then, of course, he'd been to New Guinea. And then he was called to go to Berber. So, tell us a little bit about him and his fellow
Borneo,
soldiers. I've got Borneo, yes, sorry. I did Burma, no. Borneo, which got to me. Tell us more about Les and his fellow soldiers in 18 Platoon.
Well, Les was, I think, and he's still alive at 103, possibly 104 now. Lives in Canberra with his
All
wonderful
right.
daughter who
Yes.
looks after him. And I think, from what I understand, Les is the last surviving fighting soldier from the Borneo campaign. And
Right.
I had a series of interviews with him, and he's just a simply marvelous man, modest
Yes.
and still very mentally lucid. Actually, physically in amazing shape too. I couldn't believe it. He was, no hearing aids, no glasses, anything.
Right.
A full head of hair, a real wonderful Australian gent that he was. And he told me firsthand what it was like. And he told me about these series of battles in the hills around Balak Papan, which is one of
Right.
the battle areas of Borneo. This incredibly difficult night and day fight up in the hills to dislodge the Japanese who were firing on them with these big mountain guns that they'd had embedded into the hills.
Right.
They dug tunnels, and he was up there, and it was raining, and it was stormy, and it was muddy, and the Japanese attacked at night. Even that they were attacking with spears and rocks because they'd run out of weapons, but they were
Right.
still fearsome. And this was a battle I had no idea about. But that's
No.
the thing about this campaign. And a lot of the people that came back felt a bit bitter. They were a little bit like the
The,
blokes that came back from
I
Vietnam,
think you and
Rosemary.
I
They were like,
Yes, I think you and I talked about that. My husband was in Vietnam, as was my brother.
oh, okay,
And they
okay,
were
okay.
not treated well. I think I actually said to you we tried to get into an RSL club when when Rob had
Yeah,
just come back from Vietnam, and were told in
yeah.
no uncertain terms that it was only for soldiers that had fought in a real war. So
I know how
it was one of
beggars
those.
belief, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But there were
So
actually, Michael, in Borneo, of course, there were two Victoria Crosses won, weren't there? Lieutenant Tom Derrick, known as Diver, and then, of course, Les Starchevich. They both won the Victoria Cross, didn't they?
Diver Derrick actually had already won the VC in New
All
Guinea
right.
about a year earlier. So he arrived heading his platoon in Borneo, already having the VC. But Les Starcevich, the amazing Les Starcevich, and one of the great AFL families,
All right. Yes.
the Starceviches from WA. There's a whole group of them who played AFL football at the highest level. But there was the same family from Grass Patch, WA. It's somewhere near Kalgoorlie.
Right.
And there, Les, amazingly, this young man who was pinned down at the head of his platoon by some Japanese who commanded a track with
Yes.
3 or 4 machine gun posts dug in, and these blokes couldn't move. He just decided, I'm sick of lying here in the mud, picked up a Bren gun, simply walked out, exposed himself, started opening fire, bullets flying all around him. I mean, you can't, the people who watched it could not believe what they were seeing.
Right.
And he wiped out all 3 or 4, I can't remember now, I think it was 3 machine gun posts, went back and said, okay, boss, I've cleared the way, we can keep going now. And everyone just went, Les, what the hell did you just do? And nobody's seen anything like it. And witnesses said he should have been pierced like a sieve,
Right.
but nothing touched him, and he was completely calm,
Yes.
completely nonplussed,
Yeah.
completely not nonplussed, completely
An abs-
oblivious to what he'd done,
an absolute
and it
hero.
was just
Yes.
a complete hero, but with no. Les didn't know what the fuss was about.
All
What did
about.
you give me the VC for? I just was picked up a
And
gun and started shooting, and
I'm just
I was a bit lucky. That's all.
I'm just a soldier.
Incredible. Yeah.
An absolute hero. But another one who comes out very well out of the whole thing is General Milford, who, of course, was the first Duntroon graduate to
Yeah.
reach the
He
rank
was.
of
Yeah,
general.
yeah.
He took over from General Vasey, and there were
Yes,
two
yes,
such
yes.
different personalities, weren't there? I mean,
Very different.
yes, he had a plan, didn't he, that gobsmacked the
He
army.
well, particularly the Americans didn't like his plan,
Right.
because we have to acknowledge that we couldn't have done it without the United States, because we were mainly, almost all the soldiers on the ground were Australian, from the 21st Army Group,
Yes.
being elements of the 9th and the 7th divisions, but we couldn't have got there without the Americans because we had no ships basically in World War II. We had a few, and most of them got sunk in 1942 around the Solomon Islands.
Have we got many
So we
more now?
relied on. I beg your pardon?
Have we got many more now?
We've got a few. Well, we've put our defence in the red to buy a couple of submarines, but I don't think you and I are going to be around to see them, Rosemary, sadly. But anyway, no, not many ships. But so we did rely on the Americans heavily, and they were they're in charge of of both transporting the Australians from Morotai,
Yes.
or actually initially from Townsville to Morotai, which is north, directly north of New Guinea, and then west. A week sailing over to Borneo. Now, we couldn't have done it without the Americans.
No.
So they had a big stake and they said, okay, well, this is how we want you to plan it. So you send your soldiers here.
Yes.
This is the Balak Papan, the last and the most and the largest scale operation. It was, I should say, it was done in 3 stages over 3 months. And remember, Borneo is huge. It's the size of New South Wales. It's a massive island. And the British had the north bit, and the Dutch had the rest of it. It's all part of Malaysia and Indonesia now, respectively.
Yes.
But we went in 3 places. First, we went to a place called Tarakan. Then we went into the British bit, which was Labuan or North Borneo. And the last one we did was Balak Papan, and that was the biggest, to get a huge oil refinery there. So the Americans said, okay, well, okay, General, what we want you to do is we'll drop your soldiers off here, and you can go directly into the town and take that. And General Milton said, no, I'm not doing it that way. They said, what? You can't tell the United States Navy that you little Australians? And they actually complained to Tom Blamey.
Yes.
And Tom Blamey said, well, bad luck, mate. If he's the general on the ground, you're giving us the ships and you'll do what he says. And Americans do not like being told what to do by anyone.
And that's
especially at the moment. But
exactly. And that's what happened.
That's what happened. So Milford's plan was flawless. He said, I'm not landing in Balikpapan. Sorry, it's the other way around. He wanted to go directly into the town, and the Americans wanted him to land at a safer area 10 miles up the beach, and they could advance over the beach. And basically said, no way, that's going to give our cover away. They're going to know we're coming. I want a surprise attack to go straight in before they have a chance to recalibrate. And that's exactly what happened.
Right.
And it worked brilliantly. Now,
absolutely,
even though it was the I do want to stress this, and it was a huge amount of men, like over 120,000 all told, men were, and many women as well in nursing and all sorts of things. Now, there were only there were about 2,000 casualties, around 500 deaths. And you think in the scale of World War II, 500 deaths is not a lot. And it isn't.
No.
When you compare to, goodness me, in Bomber Command, people forget this, Australia's most lethal area of World War II, we lost 5,500 men flying in the bombers and bomber campaigns. So 500 doesn't seem like a lot. But, Rosemary, you put 500 young men in a town hall.
Yes,
and it looks like a lot of people.
Exactly.
And think of the widows, and think of the grieving families, and the fatherless children, and the lives that were basically ruined, and
I know.
going on. And right at the end, where people said, "But I thought it was all over. I mean, surely the Japanese were all done in by then." And then these poor buggers came home, and nobody really cared about it.
It was
even the stories of the battles weren't even on page 1 and 2. They were being buried in the deeper pages of the paper. So they really came back and shut up about it.
But Michael, you have brought it again in front of our eyes. Now you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald. My guest today is Michael Veitch, who moved from TV into writing books on military history and other great topics. Now, we'll move on a little bit, Michael, if that's all right, because your book, Australia's Secret Army, I mean, it was really of special interest to me as well, because we lived in Papua New Guinea in the mid-60s and early 70s. As my
wow.
My husband was with the Pacific Islands Regiment. But even back then, Michael, the Second World War seemed like so far away. But, I mean, in reality, it was only 20 years, closer than the beginning of the century is now. But please tell us a little bit about these volunteer coast watchers, which were often made up of planters, missionaries and patrol officers, weren't they?
They were indeed. The story, Rosemary, is that at the beginning of World War II, we had no way of knowing what was happening to our islands. There was no radar. There was no, and even though we had these territories where you lived, Rosemary, and I'd love to ask you about Papua, you would have remembered seeing there would have been still detritus and old machines and things from World War II when you were growing up there, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Rosemary.
Actually, we had our honeymoon in Tarpini, and I worked for an airline company up there, and yes, flying into Tarpini, which is one of the most scary ports in the world, I think. There were certainly quite a few wrecks, and Rob, of course, reported, when he was on the Katoda Trail, seeing a lot of the wrecks there as well. But the volunteer coast watchers were incredible, weren't they?
We needed to know what we knew war was coming. We suspected that Japan would enter the war at some stage,
yes,
and we would be on the front line, which is exactly how it turned out for a time. And then, but what we did have in all these territories were, as you said, missionaries,
yes,
patrol officers, people growing copra and coffee and rubber, and so this organization, which became known as the Coast Watcher Organization, was put together by a man called Eric Felt,
all right,
Feldt,
yes,
and he had been a former patrol officer as well in the 1920s when we first acquired these territories, and so he was organised to go up there at the very beginning of the Second World War and organise a couple of hundred of these people into being initially unpaid, essentially civilian spies with no military training, and putting themselves in incredible danger because, as what happened when the Japanese found that there were a whole bunch of civilians acting as spies, you can imagine that they had very short lives. But the intelligence that they were able to report when war came to New Guinea was absolutely brilliant.
right,
And they were utterly fearless. They were given radios. They were paid and actually given some kind of nominal military rank, which didn't do them any good if they were captured. By the way, they were still disposed of very quickly. But things like a fellow called Paul Mason, and this is not in New Guinea. This is over on Bougainville, which of course is
it's all part
New Guinea.
Yes.
What am I talking about? They had it's all sorts of fights about it more recently, didn't they?
Yes.
He was able to give the Americans warning of the Japanese aircraft approaching to open the Battle of Guadalcanal. He was actually radioed them and said, "There are aircraft heading your way. You've got an hour and a half." Because I've just seen them go overhead where I am.
Yes.
And the Americans went, "Oh, goodness, thank you." They pulled their ships back, put their airplanes up, and the Japanese didn't know what hit them. So that was the very beginning of the big campaign. And this was as the Americans were landing on Guadalcanal in June 1942.
Right.
So things like that, all sorts of things, helping the fellows who were terribly badly treated by Australia and Japan, by the way, who were left to kind of hang out to dry at Rabaul, where the Japanese invaded it and overran the Australians very quickly. The poor blood buggers from Lark Force, they had no hope. They should have been pulled back. They should never have been sent there in the first place.
No.
Scattered through the jungle at the mercy of the Japanese and the jungle. Coast Watchers organised their retreat and their gradual. Another story here, and an amazing woman is involved.
Right.
Gladys, I've blanked on her surname.
Well, we'll remember her as Gladys, yes. But
Gladys was a plantation owner who sent her ship over to pick up a lot of the Australians and ship them back to Cairns.
Oh, gosh.
It's an incredible story.
They were incredible. I mean, this, your book is just, well, it gives them terrific credit, which they deserve. But now, Michael, you don't always write books on war and such. You've also written a terrific book called The Forgotten Islands, which, of course, is a personal adventure of the islands. I've sailed across Bass Strait a number of times and been absolutely terrified.
Oh, okay.
Terrified in the middle, and wondered about the islands, that the shipwrecks abounding on the coasts of those islands. So we've only got a little bit of time left, but just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll actually tell you about the book I'm writing at the moment, which is about one of those shipwrecks in Bass Strait. And
the
as you know,
Lockhart,
Bass Strait's
yes.
the Lockhart. Bass Strait's a crazy piece of water because it's so shallow. You probably know this more than I. It's only 100 feet deep. So the big continental shelf tides wash back and forth and create all sorts of mayhem for yachties like yourself, Rosemary.
Right.
But in 1878, it's probably one of Australia's, certainly southern Australia's most famous wreck, the Lockhart, the last sailing ship fatality in the immigration story of Australia, when the Lockhart smashed into the coast, not knowing quite where it was. He was caught on a dead lee shore. Now, I don't know what that means. You probably know what that means, Rosemary, but
look, it's all scary. I tell you that when you're in the middle of Bass Strait.
Only a young boy and a young girl survived, and he swam out and rescued her, became a hero, told the story. He was feted as a hero around the country. Everyone wanted them to get married.
I know,
they never
and they
did.
didn't. No.
Well, she was a bit more posh. She was a little bit like you. She was a bit too classy for him.
I don't think so. Michael, I've got to interrupt because Paul is waving through the window. We're running out of time, and I do want to give our listeners, your contact details. But once you've written that book, I want to get you back on so we can chat a little bit more, if that's it. But look, Michael can, of course, Michael Veitch, Veitch, is on Facebook and he's on Instagram. And his new book, Borneo, The Last Campaign, is, of course, available in bookstores. It's online. So
it's published by Hachette, which is a big publisher, easy to obtain.
Absolutely. If your bookshop doesn't have it, they'll get it in for you. Then we'll look out for the new book on the Lockhart, which was a shipwreck along Victoria's coast in 1878. But Michael, thank you so much for being my guest today, and thank you, Paul, for producing. And this show has been produced in the studios of 4RBH Reading Radio in Brisbane for syndication around Australia, and will be available on my YouTube channel, Lots to Chat About, with Rosemary Peterswald, where it would be terrific if you could press subscribe. But Michael, thank you very much again. And as I said, he's available on Facebook, on Instagram, and Borneo, The Last Campaign is his last terrific new book. Thank you, Michael.
It's been such a pleasure, Rosemary. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.